Hey, welcome back. All right, so we're going to cover what life was like in the Depression today. Last class period, we were together. We did the Depression simulation. We kind of saw how every decision the family made during this time frame was kind of tied together. And so, like, the doctor, like his housekeeper go, and he let his receptionist go, and the babysitter go. Well, that helps the doctor's family, but like, then the receptionist, like, that she was a pretty important part of her family's economy. Now all of a sudden she doesn't have a job, and so then that family hurts, and then they don't go to the malt shop, and that hurts the malt shop owner who can't afford to replace the malt machine now, and then it just goes downhill and downhill from there. So I think one of the takeaways from that from our depression simulation that we just did was how well, not how everybody's tied together, but just how everybody's affected by the depression. Even if you didn't lose your job outright, and unemployment during the depression at its height was only 25%, which is still a lot, but like it's not like everybody was out of work, but everybody's affected in some way or another. And so what is the actual daily life going to be like for lots of folks during the Depression? And this are just kind of some generalizations that we're going to talk about, and we're going to get into the election of 1932. Okay. You have different people that are going to look at this. This is just the Great Depression is probably America's biggest challenge to American democracy outside of the Civil War. This obviously the Civil War was about preservation of the Union and all those things, and then it transitions into a fight to end slavery, which ultimately offers democracy to the 4 million African Americans that were enslaved. But like this is a time frame during this Depression where people are actively kind of discussing other alternate forms of government. Like what would be a better form of government in the United States than democracy, because of the inability of the government to respond to these crises. Some people I believe during the Depression, the Depression lasts from 1929, 1930, 1931, 1932, all throughout Hoover's administration, the first 4 years. And people in America kind of like look at this as, hey, this is a possibility that this might be it. This might be how life in America is going to be from here on out. This is just the new reality. This is the new normal, right? We have 1932. We have a quarter of Americans are unemployed. 80% of the steel mills are shut down, which makes a lot of sense because you're not having massive building projects during this time frame, right? Farm income is half of what it was in 1929, and by 1929, the farm income was a fraction of what it was in 1919. And so farmers are really, really hurting. And most Americans are just trying to weather the storm. One of the things I'll talk about here with farming, though, is the fact that if you're poor on a farm, it's a whole lot better than being poor in the city during this time frame. If you're poor on the farm, you're poor on the farm, you kind of have an idea what it's like to be poor anyway. Plus, you're growing your own food. If nothing else, you're at least feeding your family. As long as you can maintain your farm and hold on to your farm. If not, then you have some issues. So the first thing Americans are going to do during this time frame is we're going to cut out luxuries or things that we're going to look at as luxuries, like telephones, some household appliances, new furniture, jewelry, things like candy, like little treats or whatever are going to go by the wayside. But there are some things that are going to sell well. And I just told you that household appliances are something we give up. However, Americans don't give up 2 household appliances, and those are going to be radios and refrigerators, because obviously refrigeration is going to allow you to preserve your food for a long period of time. So there's an economic benefit to that. And then radio is just such a cheap form of entertainment. Like after you purchase the radio, it's free. It just broadcasts into your home. It's much like televisions today. Like if your TV breaks down, even if things are bad, you're going to go buy a new TV because it's just the way that it is. Gasoline sells very well. And cigarettes become, are something that's are sold that don't see a downturn. A, because it's relatively cheap, and B, because obviously it's addicting, but also it's just a social status. Everybody, the majority of Americans in the 1920s, 1930s are going to smoke, especially the men, and it's just something that people won't give up. They're going to hold on to that for a little bit. All right. Boom, ba-dum, ba-dum, boom. Okay. Other things that survived during the Depression is movie night. Movies are relatively cheap to go to. I mean, it's a nickel, quarter, whatever, to get in. And people can go to the movies for the entire night. Like, people go to the movies and they'll watch, they'll get there at 6 o'clock and they'll watch 2 or 3 movies before they go home. A double feature or a triple feature or whatever, because one, there's no television at home, and so movies are still a novelty kind of thing. But also too, like, movies are a distraction. When you go to the movie theater and you sit down, I mean, you kind of get absorbed into the movie and you escape to someplace else. And so during this time frame, you see two types of popular movies pop up. The first one is just going to be any type of movie, like a comedy or a romance or a dance movie, that has a happy ending. Right, like during the Depression, man, people are spending lots of money to go to the movies, and they don't want a depressing movie. They want a happy movie at the end. And then the second one is going to be gangster movies. Anybody that's getting over on the system, or looks cool and it has lots of money through crime or whatever. People are going to pay lots of money to go check that out and see it, and just escape into that lifestyle or that mindset for a short period of time. To help offset the reduction in income, people are going to grow their own food. So there's going to be gardens. Everybody's going to grow vegetables. You're going to grow you're going to eat lots of green beans. Going to eat lots of broccoli. You're going to eat lots of zucchini during this time frame. I have a grandmother who grew up in McPherson, Kansas, outside of McPherson, Kansas, during the Depression. And she wasn't necessarily on a farm. Like, I think her father was a banker. Relatively well-to-do, and and she just they planted a garden and they ate green beans for every meal. And after the Depression, she wouldn't eat green beans again for the rest of her life. She hated green beans after the depression because she ate so many of them during her late early teenage and middle teenage years. You got to wear your own clothes. Women and men are going to wear hand-me-down clothes, charity clothes if they can find them. We're going to make your own clothes during this time frame. One of the things that does happen is that the flour mills, specifically in Kansas, and I know this for a fact because my other grandmother had this happen, was that moms would take the cloth from, like, the 50-pound bags of flour that they would buy, and they would turn that cloth either into like dresses or into undergarments for their kids. And so when the flour companies in Kansas found this out, or the flour mills found this out, they started to I'm sorry, they started to package their flours in bags that had like little designs on them, like pretty little flowers or whatever, like little designs that little girls would like. And so, it's a way for, big business to help out a little bit, and they do that. And also, just like for popular clothes, everything just gets simplified. If you think about like the 1920s, you would have a going out dress. You'd have like the flappers dress that would have sequins and like lots of pizzazz, and the hemlines would be up. And in the 1930s, you have very simple cotton dresses that can be worn every day. And honestly, if you have a sequin dress over time, it's going to wear out and sequins are going to fall off and it's going to look shabby pretty quickly. But a simple cotton dress going to be around for quite a while. All right. A lot of families are going to move back together. It's brothers and sisters, moms and dads going to move in with kids, or kids are going to move back with moms and dads. Because you put 12 people in home, it's a little bit cheaper than to run one home of 12 than to run 4 homes of 3 or whatever during this time frame. Kids necessarily wouldn't leave the home to get married, so marriage rates drop, divorce rates go down because there's lots of people that just can't afford to get divorced. Childbirth is going to go down because you can't afford to raise kids during this time frame, and so you know childbirth goes down, and we have that. By 1933, about 20% of American kids aren't getting the proper nutritious diet. Things like bread and potatoes, like starches, are starting to replace things like meat and fruit and vegetables. Although vegetables probably are around quite a bit during this time frame, if you have access to a garden. Here's one thing. In 1933, 29 people starved to death in New York City, the largest city in America. You have 30 people actually die of malnutrition and not being able to get enough food. Now, I don't know if that is they're actively looking for food and they can't find it, or if it's like, I don't know, maybe like a patient with dementia that just refuses help and doesn't eat. But anyways, you do have people dying, actually technically starving to death. And so you have that. So you have families that move together and they try to figure things out. You also have people that people are going to turn to if you don't have families, you might live in like homeless shelters. You might move into shanty towns, which are just like little communities with makeshift houses that you build with scraps or pieces of trash or cardboard or whatever. And they're called Hoovervilles because the people living in these homeless communities don't believe the president's really doing enough to support them. So in 1933, you have about 1 million Americans living in Hoovervilles throughout the country, which is pretty substantial. And so Hoover, in his response to the Depression, is relatively simple. He doesn't want the government to do anything. He doesn't believe that the government really has a role, or the federal government at least doesn't have a role in the lives of the individual American people. Now, Hoover believes state government should help. He believes that local charities should help, and he tries to find ways to funnel federal money into those programs. He just doesn't do it. He just doesn't send enough. And so there's problems with that. One of the reasons that Hoover is so against federal help, I believe, is that he spent the majority of the 1920s, or at least the early part of the 1920s, in communist Russia. And they had a great famine, and Hoover went over and helped to facilitate international aid. And I think he saw the effects of a communist government on the people, and was affected by this to the point that he was really adamant about not involving the government too much into the lives of people. African Americans are going to go through the Depression as well, and they're going to see much higher unemployment rates than whites, for lots of different reasons. Obviously, racism, racism and hiring practices, and the fact that hey, if you're running a factory and the white guy's doing the hiring, he's probably going to hire white guys. Secondly, African Americans are at a disadvantage coming out of the South, because they're the majority of them are unskilled workers. They don't have a specific trade. They don't have union cards. In the South, they're going to face poverty during that time frame as well, with sharecropping and those practices. The African American community is going to band together. They don't have a whole lot of support from anybody. But they would throw like rent parties, in which if you didn't have money to pay your rent, like maybe you put a couple bucks together, buy a couple bottles of booze or moonshine, because it is the 1930s and we still have prohibition. And you throw a small dance party at your house. You charge people a nickel or a dime or a quarter to come in, and hopefully at the end of the night you make enough money to pay off your rent that month. You also have blockade, where maybe somebody would go around. Let's say somebody lost their job that week. Somebody goes around home to home and asks for donations, and they try to gather enough food to help somebody make it through. And you know, if a landlord was going to come and evict a tenant, sometimes you know, the community would get together and have like a small little riot. They would throw things at the police or throw things at the landlord until they would leave, and allow people to maintain their homes at that point. Rural America, again, farm prices are going to be really low, and continue to drop. And so farmers during this time frame are going to continue to overproduce, trying to outwork their problems, right? And so we have that. You know, if you can't sell your crops for any money, a lot of people are going to lose their loans or lose their farms. The 1930s, you're going to see a drought hit the South, especially like the Tennessee Valley. You know, and in the 1930s, you're also going to see the Dust Bowl come across like Oklahoma, portions of southeast Kansas, the Panhandle of Texas, and into Arkansas. And we're going to have some problems. Here we go. The Dust Bowl. You're going to have just huge amounts of soil erosion, and the winds are going to pick up the dust and blow it all over, killing crops. And so basically almost for a decade, farmers in the Oklahoma, Arkansas, southern Kansas region are going to be affected and have just horrible crop harvest during this time frame. Some of these farmers are going to get kicked off their land, and move out to California, trying to find work as migrant fruit laborers. Oftentimes, these jobs, they would have like flyers printed up encouraging, I don't know, 10,000 people to come and pick fruit. Well, you know, they have 10,000 jobs, and they print up 1 million flyers, and they send them all over, and everybody goes out there looking for those jobs, and it causes problems. So large numbers of people are going to leave Oklahoma and Arkansas and those types of places and find more poverty and problems in California. But ultimately, you know, people settle in California. It's a nice place to live, and and hopefully it works out for some of them. You know, a lot of people are just holding on and waiting. By 1932, Herbert Hoover is probably the most unpopular man in the country. He's the president during a time of America's greatest economic downturn. Now, did he cause a downturn? No, but he just didn't do enough to facilitate a recovery that people liked. And so, you know, Hoover really believes is a staunch opponent to this idea of socialism or any type of overt government help. And you know, he chatted briefly there about his time in Russia. And so he believes that, hey, we're going to, you know, what makes America great is individual initiative. And so, like, if you don't have that and you have too much government help, then people aren't going to go out and make a difference. And so, you know, Hoover believes that too much government help is actually going to slow the recovery. He does form some things like the Committee for Unemployment Relief, tries to give funds to private industry, tries to give to like community chest organizations that are going to provide local charity. But again, just the problem is the fact that there's just too much unemployment, there's too much poverty, and he's not putting enough behind his efforts. He does increase government funding into building projects like federal roads and bridges and dams, and these are all things that Roosevelt's going to do, but Roosevelt's going to do them on a grander scale, and he's going to have more of an effect. And so Hoover starts the process, just not a large enough backing here. Hoover is going to use federal funds to try to end bank runs, and he does do a better job with the banks, but he's a little late to the party there in 1932. He's going to lose the election in November of 1932, and then Roosevelt's going to come in and totally remake over the American banking system. Here we go. It's just not enough. Businesses close, community charities run empty, and state and local governments just can't help. And so, you know, Hoover's working hard. He's working 18, 20 hours a day in the White House. but he isolates himself from the community. He doesn't go out, doesn't want to be part of whatever is going on, so where people can see him. And so people can't see him working. They don't see him as a sympathetic figure. They just kind of see him as this cold and distant guy. And he doesn't want to do these public appearances. And so he's not very popular. And then the final nail in Herbert Hoover's coffin comes with the bonus army. And so at the end of World War I, Congress had basically purchased a insurance policy for every veteran during World War I. And it's supposed to pay out, this insurance policy is going to pay out in 1945, kind of as a, hey, welcome home, thanks for your effort bonus, right? But this depression that America is going through, and by 1932, a lot of Americans are like, hey, I have this money coming in 13 years, but I need that money now. Could I take less money and could I take less money and have it now versus waiting 13 years? And so there's a lot of people get behind this idea. There's a political movement to cash out the bonus army, or to cash out the bonuses that's coming to World War I. And so in May of 1932, thousands of jobless veterans go to Washington, D.C. to basically ask for help. They ask for their money. And 15,000 kids, 15,000 people total show up, because it's May, kids are out of school. It's also the Depression. Nobody has a job. Nobody really has anything to do. And so thousands of people set up shacks and tents, and they live in vacant buildings, and they just descend in Washington, D.C. and they hold demonstrations every day asking for this money. And there's so many people, and they're asking the government to do things, and they're rambunctious, but they're not violent. To the point that, there's rumors that, hey, there's radicals, there's communists, there's these bad people that are in these camps, and they want to do bad things. And so by July, the bill comes before the Senate, and it gets voted down. And we have our old buddy Hiram Johnson, the former vice presidential candidate with Theodore Roosevelt in 1912. And the one-time governor of California, that says, hey, the time may come when men like you or me, and he's talking to senators, are lined up against the stone wall and being executed because, hey, the government's not meeting the needs of the people, and the people are, we could be on the verge of a revolution. And so the bonus army returns back to their camps relatively peacefully. There's no violence, and Congress doesn't necessarily know how to get rid of them. Because it's summertime in Washington, D.C., and it's not too bad there, right? They got nothing to return home to. It's pretty. There's things to walk around and look at. And so Hoover calls for the vacant buildings to be cleaned out, trying to get people to move. And fights break out between the police and some of the bonus army members. And ultimately two protesters are killed. And then in July of 1920, July 28th, you have the United States Army is called out to basically run everybody out of town. And so there's tanks that roll through the streets of Washington City, Washington, D.C. There's 1,000 troops. You have General Douglas MacArthur is in charge of this, but you also have people like George Patton and Dwight Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, that are all going to be actively leading troops during this clean out. And so 1,000 troops kick everybody out of Washington, D.C., and about 36 people are injured. The press is there taking pictures and covering it and writing stories in the newspaper about it. They call it the Battle for Washington, right? And they showed the newspaper the next day, shows people, with middle-aged men, of World War I veterans that were being abused by their country, right? And so as men and women get up the next day, and they're eating breakfast or eating their bowl of corn flakes, and they're reading the paper, even if they have a job, even if they're getting ready to go to work, they can see themselves in this bonus army because, hey, everybody in the Depression knows somebody that lost their job, knows somebody that probably lost their home. And they see, a lot of similarities between The people they know are themselves and these people in this bonus army. And Hoover just loses any type of account or any type of political standing at that point, right? Everyone's just angry at him. In 1932, nobody wants to run as the Republican nominee for president because you're not going to win. The economy's in the tank. It's just a bad situation. So the Republicans run Hoover because they don't really have any other choices. And the Democrats decide to go in this totally new direction with a gentleman by the name of Franklin Roosevelt, who was a governor from New York State. Outside of New York City, which just has a huge population, New York does pretty well during the Depression, right? And so the Republicans run Franklin Roosevelt, who's crazy radical at this point, right? Who wants to totally remake the country and redo the relationship between the country and the people, and he's going to win. But honestly, the Republicans, the Democrats could have run. They could have run Ape. They could have run. They could have run Herbert Hoover's cat. They could have run a goldfish, and they would have won the presidency. Roosevelt. He's governor of New York. He was stricken with polio in 1921. We talked about that a little bit previously. He's seen as energetic and empathetic because here he has a physical handicap, but again, he's out there and he's visiting poor people, and he has a wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, that's going to go out and do some wonderful things for him while he's in president also. And ultimately it's kind of like our 2016 election, the 2020 election, when a vote for Biden was really a vote against Trump. It was a vote against Trump as much as anything, right? So Roosevelt's going to do the same thing. Vote for Roosevelt to vote against Hoover. You don't have to agree with Roosevelt, but if you want something different, this is your option. And the vote for Roosevelt's a vote for the New Deal. Or if you like the Depression and you want more, vote for Hoover, right? And so Hoover tries to paint Roosevelt as this radical, and nobody listens. And Roosevelt's going to win in a huge landslide, and he'll take over the presidency and establish this new relationship that we're going to refer to as the New Deal. And that's what we will talk about when we come back together next time. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.